Okay.
Okay, so we're the 5th of June 2024, and I'm Stephanie Billen, Fringe Marketing Officer, and I'm talking to our Fringe Chair, Stephen Walker.
Hello.
Hello. So, Stephen, can we rewind a bit back to 2019? And can you tell us what some of your thoughts and emotions were when you first became chair? And whether you perhaps felt the pressure at all in following 2019's bumper 40th anniversary year?
Actually, I hadn't really thought about becoming chair, and it wasn't until very late in my predecessor Keith Savage's term that I kind of realised that he was actually going to step down. He did a long stint, and he had given us plenty of notice that he was going to go. And I suddenly started looking around thinking, I wonder who'll take over from Keith. And I kind of went, oh, right, people have already done it. And I kind of realised there was only maybe a couple of us in line to do it. So I went round and spoke to the other person, and shall we say, they were very encouraging of me doing it. so as is often the case, I was perhaps the last man left standing. And it worked out for me at that time. I kind of thought it was a good opportunity to take over at that point, and do about the kind of stint I've done, which is coming up to my 5th time. I was nervous taking over because Keith had been a very hands-on chair. He had done an awful lot of the work of the committee. But I was in a different position. I was working full time. I still had children at school. So I was kind of nervous that I wouldn't be able to put in the kind of work that Keith had. And I was thinking I would have to do it differently. But I didn't feel any pressure taking over after 2019 and the huge Fringe 40. I thought that gave me a bit of a break, actually. I thought a lot of people had come to that Fringe, both as performers and as audience, because it was a big anniversary. And I felt that we would have a retrenchment in 2020 and it wouldn't be as big anyway. And I felt that was probably a good thing. I don't really buy into the bigger is always better. I was quite happy for it to settle down and build from there. Buxton's a relatively small market town, and there's a limit to the number of people you're going to go to shows, the amount of accommodation for people coming to perform and see them, and the number of venues in the town. So
yeah, I
wasn't worried about trying to make it bigger.
So you weren't worried about trying to make it bigger. However, you possibly didn't want it as small as it became. Tell us about 2020.
2020, when it almost vanished altogether. It was funny because I'd taken over as chair and we were just getting started. So it was probably only the 4th meeting after I'd become chair. It was the March. And I remember at the last minute adding coronavirus to the agenda for our March meeting, just as something we should maybe keep an eye on in case it came to affect us. And within two weeks of that meeting, we were going into lockdown, and everything just became very complicated for the next 4 or 5 months. We really didn't know from one day to the next what was going to happen. Guidance was, at the start we're very, this will end after a month or two, and we'll be able to get back to normal. But maybe we should have some contingency plans. And then it felt like every day, every week, we were rewriting contingency plans, working out different scenarios, seeing what could be possible and what not. It was a very difficult and stressful time. Lots of Zoom meetings, I recall. So when we actually decided that we weren't going to be able to go ahead with a proper Fringe, that was good in a way because it gave us something to work towards. And that's why the committee really swung into action then. And we had 100 entries at that time. And we went back to every single one of them and we talked to them about what they could do instead. We decided to go online, which was ironic because we'd had our first ever online entry to the Fringe. And I remember having a discussion at a committee meeting. Can we have an online entry in the Fringe? How does that work? And we decided, well, of course we can. And then it soon became clear it was absolutely a pioneer. It was all we were going to be able to do was online entries. So the committee worked very hard to talk to everybody, and we refunded everybody's entry fees. We just, it was free to enter. And we thought, well, maybe some of the people who are planning to come will do something online. But I think we were surprised at the success. Obviously, there were some shows just never happened and couldn't happen. But a lot of people then put together stuff specially for us because it was online. A lot of the community in Buxton, people that had never entered the Fringe before, entered work because it gave them an outlet for the creativity when there was nothing else at that time. We had people that had grown up among the Fringe and had moved away from the town, putting stuff together and bring it. There was an excellent bit of film clips filmed in the Derbyshire countryside with poetry going over them, which was wonderful. There was a play with 3 people doing a Zoom-based play, all happening on Zoom. That was great. And then we had people turning their act towards the Fringe. So Shakespeare Jukebox filmed lots of their monologues and duologues where 2 of the people maybe lived together. And you released a different one every day, and it became a brilliant archive of what they'd done for so many years. People like Ian Bounds put together a song a day. They came in. It felt like we created something for people to look forward to every day of the Fringe. And for people that had been isolated for a long time, we had the wonderful Phone at 5 initiative building on our Fringe at 5, where entrants to the Fringe would phone up and give individual performances to people. Maybe people that couldn't get out and maybe didn't have access to the internet in the same way. We did a lot of stuff. I'm really proud of what we put together that year. And we ended up with about 100 acts, which was exactly where we'd been. They weren't the same acts, and virtually none of them were doing the same thing, but we ended up with the same number, which was pleasing.
I think I probably should have checked this, but I think it was that year that Nathan Cassidy...
That was Nathan's year, yes.
So it wasn't even 100% just online,
yeah,
was it?
Absolutely. We did have a couple of art trails
yes,
that people could walk around and see things in shop windows and in people's homes. And of course, Nathan Cassidy, the indefatigable Nathan Cassidy, came up and did a show. He was determined to do a show. So he did it out of doors, and initially it was going to be 6 people because that was the guidance, but that relaxed, and I can't remember what it was, 15 or 20 people promenaded across Pavilion Gardens and the slopes and across the marketplace with Nathan doing a show that he had very much crafted for that one.
I remember talking to him and saying, you realise that you are one of those 6 people and the reviewer is another. Still want to do it? Yes.
He was determined. I think he went to Edinburgh that year and was virtually the only person who did a show in Edinburgh. Yeah.
And then what happened in 2021? Because we weren't out of the woods yet, were we, in 2021?
In terms of preparing for the Fringe, 2021 was very, very similar, because we constantly were going, well, what will we be able to do? And of course, if for anybody looking back at those times, guidance was changing all the time.
Yeah.
So we just didn't know what would be possible. So we kept a very low flat rate entry fee. We decided not to do. We did a printed guide, but not a program, which enabled us to keep entries open right up until the Fringe started. We in the end were able to do a socially distanced Fringe, but it felt very similar from a committee point of view, from the amount of work we had to put in preparing for all eventualities. But we did actually have a Fringe. It was lovely to be back. It was really good to be in rooms seeing shows. But of course, due to social distancing, we had reduced numbers of people able to go into shows. You also had reduced numbers of people wanting to go out. People were very cautious about coming back. And it was very good, particularly of the performers and the managed venues. who weren't making it. It's a financial risk doing the Fringe anyway. Nobody gets rich doing it, but that year people were really putting themselves out there because they were maybe doing shows where if they sold out, they were getting 20 people in. There wasn't much upside to ticket sales, and it was really good for that people came and put the effort in.
It was heartening, wasn't it? And then in 2022, when I think we thought, right, this is it. Still a few COVID issues and also a few weather issues, weren't there?
Yes, we had a heat wave that year. I mean, 2022 was interesting because it felt this is much more normal preparing for it. We're putting together a program, people are entering. It was quite normal from that sense, but actually then COVID affected us during the Fringe much more. We lost quite a few acts and entrants because they came down with COVID and had to isolate and couldn't do their shows. We lost a lot of committee members and Fringe desk managers who were getting COVID and disappearing for 10 days. And that meant we were scrabbling around trying to cover, because we try and cover every show with a review. And particularly that year, somebody said, I've got COVID, I'm going to have to drop all these reviews. And every day you were scrabbling around trying to cover those. But we did it, and it was a real achievement. It was a nice feel. It was nice to be back, because I think nobody, after 18 months nearly of restrictions and so on, it was nice to get out and see things, and it was maybe the first shows people had seen indoors for a long time.
I think, again, I forget, but it was either that year or the year before when Rose Kondo, the Canadian poet, did her spoken word event. She was so compassionate, she said, I know it feels really weird, and if anyone feels a bit overwhelmed by this, they can just walk out, that's fine, and come back in again when you feel like it. And
yes.
It's touching. Yeah,
and even that year, audiences were still down. There were still people that we weren't seeing around. There were people you think, oh, I haven't seen so-and-so around. And people were still very nervous about coming back and being out and about. And that was very understandable. It was, but it was very busy but a bit more normal. But yeah, you mentioned the weather. It was, we had really hot weather that summer. And we ended up closing the Fringe desk at one point because it was just too hot. I mean, it is in a greenhouse. Yes. It's in the conservatory at Pavilion Gardens. And I think, we were there and the temperature was heading towards 40, and we just went, just close. If anybody's mad enough to come out looking for information about Fringe shows, they can pick up the leaflets, but there weren't too many people stirring.
Yeah. And then, not that bad luck follows you around, which I don't believe it does, but that we had some really sad bereavements, didn't we, in 2021 and 2022? Yeah,
that happened in between those two, wasn't it? It was the winter of 2021 into 22.
Yeah.
And that was an incredibly difficult time. Keith Savage, who had preceded me as Fringe Chair, and who had been Mr. Fringe for so long. He had been around the Fringe Committee, ever since I joined it in 2008 or something. Keith got ill and died very suddenly. It was a very short period of time, and it was such a terrible shock to us all. Keith had been a great person around the Fringe. He'd been very personally supportive to me since I'd succeeded him. He'd been very gracious to me, and just such a terrible miss. But at the time that Keith had been, we'd realised Keith was ill. I already knew that Viv Marriott, my vice chair, was ill as well. And sadly, again, a very short illness. Viv died shortly after Keith, and it was the saddest time of my time as chair, because these were terrible things that were happening, and there was nothing we could do, and very difficult to react to. I think Viv had been on the committee a few years and had become vice chair because she was so vibrant, so full of personality. She got things done, and I think Viv would have been a wonderful Fringe chair. I don't know if I'd have been sitting here in my 5th year if Viv had still been around. I think she would have loved to have been Fringe chair, and I maybe would have gone a year earlier. And I think it's very sad that she never got the chance to do that.
Of course, we think of Viv when we look at Fringe hotspots, don't we?
Yes, yeah, and that had been her initiative this summer before.
Yeah.
Where and it was a giving something back to the town. Was growing orange flowers, marigolds and nasturtiums and all kinds. I'm showing my knowledge here, but I did get a couple of seed packs this year that I'm bringing on in my own garden. And it's something we've done ever since, and we fill a planter outside the Opera House with orange plants, and we put them in lots of other places around the town, and it was a lovely flash of colour around the time, brilliant publicity for us, but also giving something back to the town.
Yeah.
And it was nice that next year then we remembered Keith and Viv in some of the awards we gave out. We gave out our Spirit of the Fringe in Keith's memory, and Viv was a great supporter of children being involved in the arts. So our youth theatre production we gave in Viv's name that year. But they're both huge misses around the Fringe.
Yeah.
Keith had stepped down from the committee, but he'd continued to bring shows and events to the Fringe.
Yes.
He put on a spoken word show with Steve Eli, the poet. He did the Postbox Trail.
Yes.
Which I remember doing.
Oh, thanks.
And there was another thing Keith did, and it's gone out of my mind. Oh, of course, the Broadwood Grand.
Piano, yeah.
The piano at the URC that Keith had done so much to restore and put on recitals at, which still continue, which is a great legacy to the.
And then we saw him driving the tram as well, didn't we? Which was kind of unexpected,
right.
but became normal, didn't it, as well?
Yes.
Yeah. So, moving on to slightly more cheerful things, 2023, hey, more of a normal Fringe?
2023 felt very normal, which was brilliant. And that seems strange when I think back to taking over as chair and thinking, what am I going to do with the Fringe over my time as chair, and to get to the 4th Fringe in and go, gosh, this is just like it was a couple of years before I took over. Isn't that brilliant?
Yeah.
And just being pleased that it had come back to what it was before, and that our reputation as a friendly place to bring work, as a place to go and see new comedy, theatre, art, music, whatever, had remained and had been enhanced, and people were bringing us interesting work as much as ever. And audiences were out. I think audiences last year were superb. I think our average audience figure was as high as it's ever been, and that was very warming to realise that we were very much back.
And torrential rain, but not actually on the carnival, as I remember, and not on Fringe Sunday. So
we got away with it. Some of our set piece events. I think the torrential rain. I think there was one famous Fringe at 5 where that people still talk about, where everybody ended up in the bandstand, acts and audience and all sheltering from the rain, and had a really good time. So that was great. But yes, torrential rain seems much more like a Buxton Fringe anyway.
Yeah. And somewhere in amongst all this, the happy day of you getting married, but was that quite tricky with everything else that was going on?
It was just busy, but wonderful. Yes, I got married about 2.5 weeks before the Fringe started. Probably, it was lovely because there was lots of people at our wedding that we had got to know through the Fringe, including each other to an extent. There was we very much did our own thing at the wedding, and we had lots of our friends performing in the evening, and everybody that performed at our wedding has been a Fringe entrant, including the bride and both our daughters. So that it was lovely. It felt like a Fringe preview for those lucky enough to be there.
And you actually wore a bit of orange.
I wore a very orange shirt indeed.
Yeah,
Which
great.
I know I get into trouble for not wearing orange enough, but I deliberately wore quite a bit of orange in my shirt that day.
You did. So what do you think the last 5 years have proved about the Fringe's resilience, and perhaps also your own?
I think what it shows is how valuable our model of a volunteer-run Fringe with a tiny budget, it shows how valuable that is and how that allows us to be nimble and react to things that are going on without incurring massive financial losses and putting everything at risk. And that's not to say anything against other festivals and fringes where people are trying to make a living by putting them on, but it does make our model a lot safer, that everybody's doing it for love and not money. We don't have any sponsors that we have to keep happy. We basically run it with the support of our loyal friends and with our entry fees and tiny bits of grants here and there, but really it enabled us to survive without risking anything, and that was great. I'm not sure, I don't know if it says anything about my own resilience at all, except I'm really tired.
We were still standing or sitting, as it were. And so this is a tricky one, but what have been some of the most positive Fringe developments over time that you've been shared, do you think?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I can't really put my finger on concrete things that we've done, because so much of it has just been about surviving over the last few years. But I think what I set out to try and do, and I think I've been successful in, is devolving, and it's not really my success, but it's devolving power away from the chair so that people feel they can pick up ideas and run with them. You mentioned the hotspots that Viv picked up and ran, and I had virtually nothing to do with. And now there are lots of things that happen on the Fringe, and I'm not involved at all, or I just turn up. Like we had our programme party last Saturday, and I turned up and helped like anybody else. There was a team of people ran it, and I think that's great, that lots of things happen without the chair having to get involved and make them happen.
Yeah. And are you optimistic? You know the answer. You know the answer you're required to give. Are you optimistic for the ongoing success of the Fringe?
I am, obviously. I think in my mind there will always be a Fringe, whatever it will look like, what it looks like, each year. John Wilson, who was chair when I joined the committee a long time ago, always said the Fringe is always the same and the Fringe is always different. There have been changes over the years. The managed venues have come and gone, or been in different places, and you look back at old programs and you see people that have been coming for years, or people who came for a few years and don't anymore, and there's always somebody new coming along. I'm very optimistic about it. I think there are challenges. I think there will be challenges over the next couple of years, particularly in terms of venues, and finding spaces in the current climate where there's not an awful lot of funding and subsidies for arts venues. It will become harder to maybe find spaces to put a Fringe on in, but there will still be stuff happening and lots of successful shows.
Yeah. And do you hope to stay involved in the Fringe, and in what sort of capacities? Or
well, I think I've said that I'm going to take a bit of a sabbatical. I'm maybe not attend so many meetings in the next year after I've stood down, and not take on too many formal roles. But I know I'm taking over as archivist. I've gone straight from being the current chair to being master of the past immediately. So I'll be archiving myself in a box on a shelf of the Green Man Gallery. So I'll be around. I imagine I'll be around in 2025, seeing shows and reviewing shows and talking about them.
I'm sure you'll be talking about them and seeing them anyway, won't you? And have you got any particular advice for your successor?
I don't think so. I think my successor will probably do a fine job, and will do it in different ways to to how I've done it, and it will be equally good and interesting, and we'll have new ideas. The only thing I would say is just lean into the goodwill that there is towards the Fringe from everyone around, and make use of the committee, because they're great and they get things done.
Well, that feels like a very happy note, unless you've got anything else you want to add.
No, I think that's great.
Okay,
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and I'd like to take this opportunity, and I'll probably have this opportunity other times, I hope, to just thank you very much for this turbulent 5 years and your brilliant steering of it all.
Well, thank you very much.